Welcome to Against the Spread here at Sportsnet, or you're watching it on YouTube, thank you, where we here at Sportsnet give you our best bets against the spread, hence the name. Wild card weekend, we gave you some bets. They were all right, but the week in general was pretty wild.
It was crazy, yeah. Yeah, the weekend seemed to have everything. Overtime, new coaching hires. It just had it all. The Eagles being out headlined by Dallas during that game as they fired Jason Garrett. It just was a really, truly wild weekend.
Yeah, and lots of defense, so I hope you picked the under. Your takeaway from the weekend of games before we promote the games coming up was what?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me was what might be a changing of the guard at quarterback in the NFL, because we saw two future Hall of Famers in Tom Brady and Drew Brees really, really struggle and both go out in the first round when many wouldn't have been ridiculed for taking these teams to make deep runs. And it kind of feels like, in New England at least, Tom Brady, his future's so up in the air. It kind of feels like that dynasty is coming to an end. Everyone's talking about that. And I think that is true. You see Mahomes and Lamar coming up, and they're the future of the AFC. And in the NFC, I mean, Drew Brees just played an active role in the Saints being bad on Sunday. And you could see that also. I'm not saying Drew Brees is going to be done, but there are going to be quarterbacks in the NFC that are going to take the place of Drew Brees in the years to come. So a changing of the guard at QB is kind of my biggest takeaway from Wild Card Weekend. What about you?
When you look at those guys, I think the thing that sticks out at you is their yards per attempt. And how few it is in comparison to those other young quarterbacks who are playing well. We're going to see a couple of them this week in Lamar and Mahomes.
For Brady, that's, I think, a lack of weapons. And I think New England's done a pretty bad job of surrounding him with big play receivers and running backs. But for Brees, that was a really shocking outcome. I was saying pregame that he was the third best quarterback in that game. And that's true. Taysom Hill had a much better game than Drew Brees did.
Well, of the 40-year-old quarterbacks to play, Drew Brees was the third best out of them.
Yeah, really.
Tough week for 40-year-old quarterbacks.
For sure.
Brees and McCown getting his first playoff experience.
Unfortunately,
he had 5 snaps all year. Tough spot to be in. And then obviously Tom Brady, who I can't imagine that Tom Brady's career, at least in Foxborough, is going to end in the wild card round against Tennessee, losing to Ryan Tannehill by throwing a pick six.
Yeah.
That's wild to think, but when you think of great quarterbacks, I think why Elway is so special is because they often don't get to ride in the sunset.
No, definitely
as
not.
Winners, and specifically with their own team. Like Joe Montana had this whole other career with the Chiefs. To me, I think the biggest takeaway, not just about Wild Card Weekend, but when you look at where the sport is so many great passing offenses, and we're talking about these great quarterbacks, and the fact that maybe their time has come, and their time this season certainly has come. When you look at the top 10 passing offenses, 9 of them didn't make the playoffs.
Wow.
And when you look at the way the game is and how it's so pass-friendly and it's reverted that way, well, defenses are not just going to continue to get 500 yards a week thrown on them. They're going to adjust. And when we look at the teams that are still playing, and the teams that were successful last week, Tennessee running the ball down your throat, Minnesota with Dalvin Cook, obviously San Francisco with multiple runners. Mm-hmm. The Ravens have really made new football old again by the way they run the football. You're seeing teams take advantage of how small defenses are, how light they are in the box, and now I think the new way of doing things, maybe the winning way, would be running the football efficiently, even though that's crazy to sound, because the analytics would say that a running play is a bad play most often.
Yeah, I think it's obvious that running the ball not only runs out the clock, and if you can get big gains, it sets you up ahead of schedule when it comes to first down and second down. But what it also does is it sets up the pass, and we saw that with Kirk Cousins for sure. Tennessee relies on the play action as well, and it's those kind of teams that are finding success. At least in the first weekend of the playoffs. We'll see what happens.
we will get to the picks, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, as a hardcore Eagles fan,
right?
Carson Wentz's injury, and I will say the conversation that this was another piece of evidence in the fact that Carson Wentz is injury prone was crazy.
Ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
If you took
it's a conversation I don't want to have about, like, no.
If you took anybody
that was a headshot
who has been injured before and hit them in the back of the head, there's a chance they're well going to get a concussion.
Right.
Especially if it's done by a 280-pound human being moving at full speed. But I will ask you this.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there should have been a penalty on the play with Clowney?
Yeah, I do feel like there should have been a penalty on the play. It was obvious, and I mean, in real time, I didn't see the headshot. I saw Wentz get up and he looked uncomfortable. I thought it was like a rib or upper body injury, and we saw the replay over and over and over. But it was Clowney leading with his head, and if there wasn't a referee watching that play, then what were they doing? There should have been someone who saw that head-to-head hit. I think it should have been a 15-yard penalty. But obviously, that wasn't called. And it was just an unfortunate way for the season to end because the Eagles had battled injury after injury, and that was the one that finally did them in. Because as well as McCown played, they weren't themselves, especially in the red zone. When they got into the red zone, they had multiple opportunities to get it into the end zone, and they couldn't. And under Carson Wentz, they were a ridiculously successful team in the red zone. So I think that would have given them a much better chance. I'm not saying it's a guaranteed win or anything, but I think they're more in that game if Carson Wentz is playing.
Agreed. A team that was pretty good in the red zone, and it's the reason why they're still playing, is the Minnesota Vikings. They won the game.
Yeah.
Walk off.
Yeah.
In the
good
red
in the
zone.
red zone in both offense and defense.
And defense,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
In that play as well, with them winning with the jump ball to Rudolph, it was another call that was questioned after the game, or maybe non-call that was questioned.
For sure.
They feel bad for Saints fans. They will be watching Minnesota go to San Fran and be 7-point underdogs. And for the playoffs, and for the divisional round, our spreads this week are pretty big.
Yeah, they are.
Too many points for you. Are you a believer in Kirk Cousins? Do you like that 7 points? Or are you with the Niners, who 57% of the public is with as of right now?
I'm going to ignore that you like that thing because I'm so done with that. But I think what we saw from Minnesota is a winning formula. And I think what we saw was when this offense is healthy, when they have healthy Dalvin Cook, and he does look 100%, and Adam Thielen, who made a couple of big plays despite fumbling on the opening drive and having a bad penalty, throughout the game, but he made a difference when it mattered most. I think this is the type of offense, like we alluded to earlier, that can win in the playoffs. And against the Saints, they came up against a run defense that was top 5 in the regular season, and Dalvin Cook shredded them. Now they're coming up against a 49ers rush defense that was ranked 17th during the regular season, and they allowed 100 yards or more in all but 4 games on the ground. So I think the Vikings do have a path to success against San Francisco. What's going to be really interesting in my eyes is to see how Mike Zimmer, who had a great game coaching defensively against the Saints, adjusts for what is a really tough offense to defend in San Francisco. The points are too much for me. I'm going to take the Vikings here. I think another upset is probably unlikely given how good San Fran has been this year. But I think the Vikings do have the formula to keep it close. And interestingly enough, against the spread, since the start of November, the 49ers are 1-3-1 at home. So they haven't been covering at home. And given what we saw from the Vikings, I think they can keep it close.
I really like this Niners team. I think if you're looking for some future bets on who's going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl, it's a good time to put some money on the Niners because I think the team matchup-wise that they would really fear left in the bracket would be the New Orleans Saints, who will be watching this game at home. Having said all that, the Niners win, and they win close games. Every game since Week 13 they've had has been decided in the last 10 seconds. And
Wow.
3 of those games have been decided on the final play. We know the Vikings are up for a close game. I think this is going to be a defensive matchup, so take the under, and right now it's at 45.5. But I will say this. I think the Niners win. I'm really confident. But I also think Minnesota keeps it close, and it's a field goal game, if that. And that's why I'm picking the Vikings to cover. And that's probably going to be a trend for me as we look at these games. Is I do think the divisional games will be relatively close. Do you think this one's going to be close? Baltimore in the playoffs after Tennessee maybe ends the dynasty. Don't at me, Patriots fans. I said maybe. Baltimore still favored by 9 points at home over the Titans. Is that too many points for you?
This one is an interesting one for me because I've gone back and forth with it. Like we said earlier, it perfectly captures how football is being played right now. These teams run, better than most. I think it's the first-ranked running team against the third-ranked running team. The Ravens, obviously, they are a record-breaking team running the ball with a record-breaking quarterback under center, and then Derrick Henry, 180 yards against a Patriots team that had never given up that amount of running yards in a playoff game. So that is obviously what these teams are focused on offense going into this game. But I actually think the difference in this game is going to be the passing games. You look at Tannehill, he really struggled against the Patriots, and they have a really good secondary, and now he's taking on a Ravens team that also has a really good secondary. They're a top 6 secondary team against the pass. And then Lamar, who obviously is known for running the ball, he is the record-breaking quarterback when it comes to that in a season, but he also threw the most touchdown passes this year. He can throw the ball, and he's really successful at it, whether it's to tight ends, running backs, doesn't matter. And he's coming up against a Titans secondary that ranks 24th. So I think that's where this game is decided. And as close as all these games have been, we're going to see a blowout in these playoffs, and I think the Ravens are the team to do it. I think this game is not going to be close. I think the Ravens do cover the 9, and it's interesting. I looked at their against the spread record, the Ravens. They're 4-4 at home, but in their last 5, they're 4-1, and that includes blowout wins over the Pats and over the Texans, 2 playoff teams. So I think they come into this game, they blow out the Titans, who, good for them. They've made a good run, but can't hang with a real contender. And I think Baltimore wins pretty convincingly.
I agree. I mean, we talked about the Niners and their ability to win close games. Baltimore has the ability to blow out really good teams, and we've seen it. And the Titans emotionally will be drained after beating the Patriots, then packing up, going back on the road to face a Baltimore team that really has rested their important players for 2.5 weeks at this point.
Yep.
There's 3 1,000-yard rushers in this game. 2 of them are Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah.
And I think their ability, assuming Ingram is healthy and ready to compete, their ability to both, when they need to, score quickly offensively, but also, given game score situation, bleed the clock as well, I think allows them to run away with this game early. And so I've got Baltimore winning the 8:15 p.m. Eastern Saturday game. It's one that I'm really looking forward to because
definitely.
As a former running back, I love to actually see a throwback where we might see both teams run it 35, 40 times, which is crazy.
That's an interesting thing for me is Derrick Henry has been run so many times over the last few weeks. Can he continue to be that guy? Can they go to him 30 more times in this game?
Yeah. And I do think there's a scenario where Baltimore runs it 4 times, but Lamar ends up with 5 TD passes.
Yeah.
Because of their
he's
ability.
done that a few times.
Yeah, with the play action fake. And as good as the Titans played defensively, there were plays there to be made in the passing game. The Patriots didn't make them. Julian Edelman with a big drop late. N'Keal Harry with some missed assignments and a drop. So I do think Baltimore offensively will have a big day against Tennessee. I think both teams in this next matchup may have huge offensive days. Houston going to Kansas City. The over-under was at 49. It's now at 51. The line is still at -10 as Kansas City as the favorite. I think both are intriguing bets, but 10 points is a lot of points.
It is a lot of points, especially when you consider that the Texans went into KC earlier this year and won by a touchdown.
Yeah, and we'll see. Will Fuller was a guy who tried to go and wasn't able to. If he's able to play with another week's rest, that certainly will help the Texans offense, giving them a deep threat. 10 points. Where are you leaning?
Yeah. We talked about that rematch. I think the biggest difference in this game from that one is that Kansas City's defense is playing much better than they had been. They gave up 472 yards in that game against the Texans in what I think was week 6, including almost 200 yards on the ground. Carlos Hyde just shredded them, and the Texans controlled possession. I don't think that's going to happen in this game. In the last 5 games, the Chiefs have given up less than 300 yards per game and just over 10 points per game. Now, that's against some pretty bad teams for sure, but I think there is an improvement there regardless. But you talked about Will Fuller, and I think that does make a big difference for the Texans. I mean, it's in the numbers. Just go look at what they do with Fuller and without. And so because of that, and because some of the heroics that Deshaun Watson pulls off, I mean, he single-handedly won that game for them against the Bills. At one point, they had a 9% chance of winning that game, and they still ended up pulling it out. And I think despite all the problems that the Texans have, they have a lot. Deshaun Watson tends to get himself sacked, and then the game plan against the Bills in the first half was completely mind-boggling. But I think they will be in this game, and given how the Chiefs are playing, you know, I have them as my Super Bowl winner, and I still stand by that, but they aren't as convincing on offense as they have been. So I'm going to take the Texans. I think Chiefs win this game, but I do think Watson does enough to keep it close.
See, I was leaning that way because the 10 points scared me. But the Texans actually scare me. I mean,
they're very inconsistent.
They did. And I think, you know, Deshaun Watson, who if he isn't wrapped up and is sacked and the Texans end up losing, maybe we're talking about does Bill O'Brien still have a job next year?
Yeah.
So in a way, he saved their season and his head coach's job. But to me, their win was more about the Bills actively losing than Watson's heroics aside, them going and taking that game in Kansas City defensively. You know they're going to be a bit better in terms of rushing the passer with Suggs, situationally giving them some pass rush. And remember, this game is Sunday. And so if Saturday Baltimore goes through, and he now knows that he's one win away from a rematch against a team that said that he was kind of too old to be on their team and helping them compete. I think that's a motivational factor. So I actually think Kansas City can cover the 10, which I know I'm going to be watching this game, and Houston's going to drive the field on the first possession and scoring. I'm going to think to myself, man, we're going to have to make up 17 points.
Yeah.
But I do think there's going to be a lot of points. So I do like both the over and Kansas City with 10 points.
These spreads are interesting because obviously we saw a wild card, and that's kind of where the also rans are playing. Not to say that a wild card team can't win, but like those are obviously the teams that aren't as good, and then you come into the divisional round and these spreads are so big, but it actually makes a lot of sense because these are the best teams in the NFL right now, and I do think they can cover these. Just Watson is such an X factor for me that I can't take 10.
Yeah, well, the history in the last 6 years of only 1 and 2 seeds advancing to the Super Bowl shows you that those teams have buys for a reason. Now, if there is a wild card team that could make a run like the Packers did under Mike McCarthy and get all the way to the Super Bowl and win, it would be the Seattle Seahawks for me, because they have a quarterback who's an X factor, an MVP candidate in Russell Wilson, and they were really a couple plays away throughout the year of being a team with a bye themselves.
Yeah.
They go to Green Bay, and the spread is -4. So this is the closest one we have throughout the week. I'm interested to see how you feel about this game, because Seattle didn't actually look all that good against Philadelphia until Carson Wentz was ruled out for the game.
Yeah, this one's interesting because we both seem to have a pretty good idea of what the other games look like against the spread at least, but this one, I don't know. It's kind of up in the air. There's so many different factors here that come into play. It's one of the best home teams. Green Bay is 7-1 and 5-3 against the spread, hosting one of the best road teams. The Seahawks are 7-1 and 6-2 against the spread, plus a road playoff win. So that's an interesting dynamic. There's no real advantage there. And then the other thing is that neither team is all that great at anything. Like the Packers are top 10 in points allowed, but very middle of the pack and everything else. The Seahawks have a top 5 run game, but that backfield that led them to that has been decimated, and now they have Travis Homer and Marshawn Lynch. And those two guys combined for just 19 yards on 17 carries in Philadelphia. So it's not like that's a big factor. And then otherwise, the passing game for the Seahawks, very meh, outside of Russell Wilson, which is a huge factor, and the defense is below average. So I think it comes down to those quarterbacks. Rodgers, Wilson. Rodgers has been inconsistent. We haven't seen what we normally see from him taking over games as consistently as we have in the past. And then Russell Wilson has done those things. So I'm going to lean with Russell Wilson here, and I feel like even if they don't win this game, it's going to be a close one. Seattle has played in 13 one-score games this season, and they've won 11 of them. So I think they're going to be close in this game, and I think they can pull it out, but at least it's a field goal game. So I'm going to take the road team here.
This one was really tough for me. You look at Green Bay and how good they are at home this year. 7-1 at home, 5-3 against the spread. And then you look at Seattle, well, going on the road, as we saw in Philadelphia and we saw throughout the year, not an issue for them. 8-1 on the road, 6-2 on the road against the spread. So really, and it's weird to say about the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field at this time of year, you really got to throw home field out at this point, because it's not a huge factor for Seattle, even though it has been for Green Bay. I do think, however, how decimated the Seahawks have been due to injury throughout the season, so much so that they had to get Marshawn Lynch off of the couch and into the backfield. Yeah. I think that is the biggest difference. And so I do think 4 points is the closest line throughout this week. I do think Green Bay will cover the 4, and I'm relatively comfortable with Aaron Rodgers with an extra week of both rest and preparation to get it done. A lot of people talked about the fact that, well, Mike McCarthy being hired with the Dallas Cowboys, yes, he's got a Super Bowl pedigree and he's won one, but man, is it a notch on his resume or something you should be alarmed at that he only won one Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers in his prime? I think Aaron Rodgers realizes that he only has so many kicks to that Vince Lombardi can left in his career, and this is probably going to be one of his best opportunities. And so to elevate himself in that upper echelon of conversation in terms of quarterbacks historically, I think another ring would do it, and so I think he's at least going to get to the conference championship.
You've talked about McCarthy a couple times here, so it's clearly on your mind.
Oh, boy.
So I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, a diehard Cowboys fan, how you feel about Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, die and hard are good words to use because that is how it is felt as a Cowboys fan. I mean, I guess if I had one word to describe my feelings on the hire, it'd be meh. Meh. Like, I'm not excited. Jason Garrett, great person. Anybody would have been a better choice as a head coach in the 2020 and 2021 season than Jason Garrett at this point. But Mike McCarthy is just an older version of Jason Garrett. He's an offensive guy who there were real questions about his offense or the evolution of his offenses. Now, he has sworn that he's, gone to an analytics boot camp with his friends.
He's studying the trends.
He's studying the trends, and he's much more with times. But some of the offensive coaches, and Kellen Moore and John Kitna, are still under contract, and they did a pretty good job because throughout the year, the Cowboys were a top 10, if not top 5 offense in almost every category. The issue with this team is with the defense. And so I'm not really sure how Mike McCarthy, who's going to bring Mike Nolan with him, certainly solves that. Listen, the biggest takeaway for me is that before the deal was signed, he's having sleepovers at the owner's house.
Yeah.
Like, what you needed to learn from this hire was that there was going to be a division between church and state, that Jerry Jones was going to run the business and that he was going to find a CEO to run the football team. That's clearly not happening when you're having a pajama party before you're even being announced. And so
that is a jarring mental picture right there.
Well,
Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones and having a pajama party.
While Jason Garrett is still lobbying for his job, there hasn't even been a press release.
He's at the door outside, like, guys.
Pretty much. It's kind of like, the NBA situation where DeAndre Jordan was locked in his house until he
Garrett's
re-signed
locked
with the Clippers. Garrett's locked out. You talk to two coaches, Marvin Lewis and Mike McCarthy, both meh. It wasn't an exhaustive search by any means. You ruled out all college coaches.
Right.
It's just, to me, more of the same. And when the reports came that Mike McCarthy was at his house as if he couldn't find a hotel to put him up in the Dallas Metroplex area, just let me know that Jerry just wanted someone that he could control once again.
Right.
He wasn't going to have Mike McCarthy do a walk of shame and hire somebody else.
No.
So I think what I'm saying is that the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys is Jerry Jones. Someone may have the title and may have the business card, but he ultimately is the guy who holds a press conference, makes the draft picks, and decides what they do and who they sign. So it's meh because nothing has changed, even though they made a change.
Interesting. Good analysis.
Thank you for that therapy session.
Yeah. Two things for me before we quickly end this. It's going to be really interesting to see how McCarthy works with Kellen Moore, because it sounds like Kellen Moore is going to stay. Who's going to call the plays? That's going to be super interesting.
And what type of offense? McCarthy's a West Coast guy. Moore has been more of a zone read, spread the football guy, so that'll be interesting.
Definitely. And then, like you said, how are pajama party partners Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones going to get along? How will McCarthy handle the post-game tears welling up in his eyes Jerry Jones press conferences that are going to be inevitably held when this team goes 8-8 and misses the playoffs again?
Well, as an Eagles fan, you can take some solace.
I take much solace in this.
That the Cowboys, probably the greatest threat right now anyways in the NFC East to your reign, is the ongoing reality show of the NFL. So
that was fun.
Yeah, I guess so. For you it was.
Thanks, man.
Jerry Jones giving Mike McCarthy a rose and asking him to stay for 5 years in a guaranteed contract was not fun for me. Hopefully this was fun for you. Thanks for watching.